right? So during last session, right, we have done one end-to-end example, something student management system or student registration application. Which one is that? This one. Yeah, not this. Yeah, student registration application, right? Not this one. Student management system. Which one is it? SMS? Yeah. Okay. So here we did the complete end-to-end flow, front end to back end and back end to front end. Let me go through it once again. So in front end, I have a slash registration.rbu action with the three parameters name, email address. So this slash registration.rbu, or I can have any number of views with multiple actions. And with the .rbu extension, I have all that actions. If you consider, each action should go to dispatcher servlet only. So I configured my front controller in such a way every URL pattern who is having .rbu extension, their request must go to dispatcher servlet. And dispatcher servlet will use handler mapping class to identify controller. Handler mapping is the helper class for dispatcher servlet as per architecture. Okay, so handler mapping class will help to direct or to identify the controller. When I got a request from view received by Tomcat and transferred to dispatcher servlet, all views first will go to dispatcher. Dispatcher will use handler mapping. Handler mapping will identify which controller need to execute it for that so and so action. So all the configurations they read from XML only, from your Spring XML configuration, XML or annotations, whatever it is. Handler mapping will read configuration from this XML and it identify which controller should be executed. So based on that, dispatcher servlet will take forward the request to your dispatcher servlet will take forward request to controller class. So from controller onwards, we know how the request goes. Finally, controller will give response back to dispatcher servlet in the form of model and view. Controller will give response in the form of model and view. As part of this model and view, we can have response data plus view name. Dispatcher servlet will take help of view resolver to get the location of your output page and extension of it. So view resolver is a helper class to identify the location and extension of your output page. So based on that location and extension, dispatcher servlet will send finally a output page, response page back. So this is the very high level architecture. Request flow, request goes this way and the response will come back as a model and view. And finally it will deliver response. Same thing we did here. So the dispatcher servlet via handler mapping. So this is the default handler mapping. When I use bean with name, internally it will use bean name URL handler mapping. So if any bean contains name which is matching with URL, it will execute that bean. Who do that? Bean name URL handler mapping. So there is a class name called bean name URL handler mapping class. This class internally helps dispatcher servlet to identify what it will tell to dispatcher servlet. Go and find any if any bean contains name which is matching with URL. Execute that. So then dispatches alert will visit this XML file and it will see there is a student controller which is configured with the URL as a bean name. It will execute this class. So the request will go to this controller class, and here we are reading data and sending it to service layer. From here you know how to implement service and DAOs, all this stuff. Once after done with the save operation, I am sending response back with the student object. Student ID was created as part of DAO along with name, email address. The ID also loaded into this object. That object I am sending as a response back to the view as a model and view. So as soon as model and view request coming to dispatches are late, it will ask this view resolver. Internal resource view resolver it is using. So here prefix and suffix we need to configure. Prefix says the location of your output page. Suffix says extension of your output page. And what about the page name? Page name you are configuring here in the model and view. You are hard coding it. If you don't want hard code, you may inject it via dependency injection. It's up to you. So the view name you are configuring. Finally, that view as a response returning back to the user. Now in this architecture or in this plan, what we did, all the configurations we have configured into one config class. All the configurations we configured into one config class. Which all configurations? Connection pool injected into session factory injected into Hibernate template. Same Hibernate template I am using in DAO class via auto wiring. And same DAO object I am using it in service class via auto wiring. And using the DAO object only I am doing my CRUD operations here. So same service class I am injecting into controller class. So that whichever request I got here, that request data sending it to service. So service will call controller call service call DAO finally storing your data into database. Up to here fine. So in last session we thought here we have two more configurations, right? Controller and these configurations. So shall we shift these two configurations also to the configuration? First let me shift this view resolver. I will comment view resolver here. Instead of having this bean here with the bean tag, I can use @bean annotation also. So use @bean annotation and have a method public view resolver. Public view resolver create view resolver. Same stuff you can put here. Internal resource view resolver, new internal resource view resolver dot set prefix view resolver dot set suffix. Finally return it. So what I have in this view resolver as a prefix, I have my output page file location. Suffix is .jsp. And can I shift this as well? Let's see. Controller also I want to shift to configuration itself. Somewhere this bean object should be created. But controller is not a configuration object, right? It's a controller class. I can use controller stereotype annotation. Yes, you can use that. We will use that approach as well. First, assume that you are just shifting from XML to annotations. Public your controller object. Public controller student controller. Just our plan is we want to shift all these configurations, right? 0 configurations I want to do in XML file. So I'm just shifting it to at the red bean. Just instead of tag, I'm shifting it to controller class. Bean with the name URL pattern. Just we are playing with this, okay? Is it with everyone? Is my screen visible? Yeah, maybe your side. Okay. Yeah, I'm into now. Yeah, this is XML file, right? So this XML file controller class, I'm configuring it into config class. Bean name, there we have name attribute. Here I'm using bean with the name parameter in the annotation itself. Now student controller, create student controller object, new student controller, return student. Okay, now all configurations shifted to config class. Not even a controller I have here. Just annotations I'm activating and asking to component scan to scan all the classes which are there in com.rbu.sms with the stereotypes. So I used for DAO one repository stereotype, so DAO object will be created automatically. Service object also will be created automatically. Only two stereotypes. And the third stereotype is configuration I used with at the rate bean. So these three objects, including all these bean objects, will be created. Now let's try this. Will this going to work or no work? It should work because same configurations we did, but via annotation. No, actually, I'm almost running application. So I run it. So view page also came here. Are you able to see the output page? Okay. So now let me hit it here and see. Register. Go, 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 go. No. Saying status not found. So I configured it via slash registration dot rbu. Not identifying it. Return it like a student controller without a stereotype I configured controller. I have never tried this before, but let's see how it is differentiating from XML to annotation. I'm not sure. Same data. So go, 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 go. Oh, yeah. So the request is going and data inserting successfully. I got the response back. ID 21. Yeah. So controller we have configured via config. Bean with name. Name is your URL pattern. So here bean name URL handler mapping will use by default internally. So all configurations shifted from XML to config class. Okay, nice. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Configuration class. Hmm. Even before scenario also same. Even in before scenario also same. Just configuration is like another XML file. You can consider in that way. Each bean annotation consider like a bean tag in XML. So first thing, hmm, it is again SIF. Yeah, it will call view resolver object. It never create view resolver. It will use all these objects which are already created. You only will create handler mapping. You only creating view resolver objects. So whichever objects are created with IOC, right, that objects it will utilize dispatcher servlet. Again, finally, who created your IOC object? Dispatcher servlet only, na? Dispatcher servlet is having your IOC reference. So using your IOC object, what it will do, IOC dot get bean of, whenever it needs a object, it will call get bean of handler mapping. So it will get handler mapping object. It get bean of view resolver object. It will get internally. That is how the internal logic of dispatcher servlet. Duplicate objects, right? It will confuse, I believe. We saw one confusion scenario in auto wiring, right? Ambiguity issues. It may say ambiguity, or you can try. Who stops you if you try it? Try it here and there. Will it say duplicate or not duplicate? Already we have this configuration. So if I configure it one more time in XML file, if it feels they are duplicate, it will give you ambiguity error. During object creation itself, it will say I have view resolver object. Why you are creating one more object? Or else it will create both the objects, and it may give preference to uh, annotation must be. See the no error I see here. Let me insert the record one more time. Record got saved, and which one it picked, I'm not sure. So if you want to create confusion and yeah, let me put the different location webinf slash htmls something. View location got changed. If your response is coming successfully, that means it is giving must be giving preference to annotation. Or if it is giving 404 html's location is not found, if it says, then it must giving preference to xml approach. Go. Yeah, so it is trying to identify from htmls which is part of your xml file. Yeah, correct. It is overriding. You think in this way. So while loading this XML file at line number 6 itself, it will create your configuration objects, correct? Configuration service repository objects. Later, after all that objects creation, line number 10 to 14 was executed. By that time, there is a view resolver object already. By this time, already view resolver object is there. Again, you created, yeah, annotation object is already created. So when you try in line number 10 again, it must be overriding the existing object. So the preference going to the new object, which is coded here. Okay. Same object again, one more time you are trying to creating. Yes, it is creating and it is overriding it. Okay. So yeah, XML object getting used. It is using, maybe it is overriding the old object which you configured here via stereotype. Now, now let's shift it to right. Already we have controller class here. Okay. So controllers are tightly coupled with controller interface. I don't want to use them. I don't want to use controller implementation. I want to use pure stereotype annotation here. At the rate controller already I have. Why I should use controller annotation? I mean controller implementation here. I can go with stereotype. So let me implement my class with stereotype and see how it will function. Here also means I didn't get at the rate mapping you are saying. Yeah, yeah. No, no. Configurations always should place inside configuration annotation. Okay. Yeah. Your question maybe this is what, right? Whatever I have created as a bean here, this is controller. I have a stereotype. Why I am configuring it here? All other classes are excluded, right, from configuration. They are comfortably creating with stereotype annotations. So now your controller also can be configured in the same way. You need not to keep this controller in XML file, or you need not to configure it as a config. Easily you can configure this via stereotype. Let's comment here. Same controller, right? Student controller. You may remove this controller dependency, and let me comment this method as well. How I can implement my controller here with stereotype? Use at the rate controller annotation. Use at the rate controller. So when you mention at the rate controller, then IOC or dispatcher select will treat this class as a controller class. So and it will expect methods with the mapping. It will expect methods with the mapping. This is controller class. Under this controller class, you can have a method. Under this controller class, you can have a method public. Component scan is scanning all the classes. Till now we scanned via component scan. Till now we scanned only service and DAO classes and configuration class only. Controller class we either configured in XML file or via at the rate bean we configured it. Then what about service, DAO, configuration classes? They are created with stereotype. These three classes we used stereotype. Service at the rate service we used, DAO at the rate repository we used, configuration at the rate configuration we used. Controller only I configured via at the rate bean annotation or by using bean tag. Now I am avoiding it. Bean tag or either bean annotation. I don't want to use this, or I don't want to configure it here with the bean tag. Okay. So controller also is having a stereotype. Why I should configure either in config class or XML file. This one also automatically can be scanned via component scan. This also can be scanned via component scan, like your service DAO configuration objects. Your controller object also will be created. And what about mapping? Bean name mapping I configured here, or bean name mapping I configured here with my URL pattern. What about when I use stereotype? Here also you can do that. You can do that here as well. So create any method with any name, create student, something like that. Create a method with the request mapping. So the mapping which you have missed, right? That mapping you need to put here. Request mapping. The path you need to mention here. Slash registration dot rb. Same mapping, whichever you did in XML. Yeah, yeah. So that you should not confuse. That is different, right? I have never used stereotype for that. I just tried this XML alternative, not stereotype alternative. Two alternatives we are trying it. XML to pure configuration I shifted first. Getting? This is XML configuration. Yeah, XML configuration to configuration class configuration I shifted. Just the same copy paste I did. Instead of in a XML file, I shifted to config class. That's it. But my question is why still I should use this at the rate bean or this XML here? We have stereotype annotation separately. Your controller also having a stereotype annotation, so automatically your class can be scanned and created object. In that scenario, you don't have privilege to configure it in XML file or configure it in app config class. You need not to do that here or there. You can directly create your class. Automatically this class can be picked up. Okay, this class object can be created by your IOC. Okay, so this is the pure alternative for XML. This is the pure alternative. In case if you are converting your XML based to configuration type, you can use this. This is also one way, but this is not the right approach. Use stereotype. In case of stereotype, how you will map request to method? You need to use request mapping. You should be using request mapping. Just a minute. Okay. Now you can have the same statements, same code here, model and view. Any number, exactly. So in programmatic case, I have a limitation that I can have only one method. Now you don't have that limitation. One single class can have any number of methods. So now one method mapped with request mapping create student. In the same application itself, you can have update. I mean, in the same controller itself, update student, delete student, select student, whatever try CRUD operations we do. Create, select one record, select all records, update record, delete record. All that five methods you can have here instead of having five separate classes. In earlier case, we have only one method for one class. Now you can have any number of methods in one class with the handle request map bus. Now see how it will run. Basically, when I use controllers, so when I use controller annotations, this annotation config will activate only stereotype annotations or it will create objects for stereotypes. MVC annotations it will not activate. We need to activate MVC annotations also. Here we need to activate MVC annotations. For that we need to add one more tag extra here. Let me get that. For now, at the rate controller, at the rate handle request we use. There are many more annotations. In MVC, we will see that. controller, component, MVC only, but it's a stereotype annotation, right? Which will help to do component scan. On top of class, whatever you used to automatically to scan and create object, those are stereotype annotations. Okay, so if you see here, which used to create object, not everything. On top of class, you can configure request mapping also. Okay, yeah. So no, it's a simple mapping annotation. Stereotypes are for what? As per our discussion, object creation, scanning and create objects automatically. Component scan tag, what it will do, it will go to this package, it will create objects for that classes automatically by identifying the annotations for stereotypes. Yeah, annotation config annotation. Ah, okay. The tag is to activate your annotations. Auto wearing annotations we are using, right? To activate them. Post construct, pre destroy if you use lifecycle annotations or required or auto void kind of annotations, transaction annotation. If you use anything to activate your annotations, you should configure this. Similar way, MVC annotation we use it not. In controller, this is MVC annotation, request mapping. So to activate this request mapping annotation also you need to put one more tag. So that is here. Let me just, let me use the schema here. XSD or DTD's uses, they will control the tags which you have in your XML file. Who is doing validation to your XML? Here you are using lot of tags. A parser will validate it. Parser will validate whether this tag is allowed or this attribute is allowed or this property tag is allowed or not. These validations must happen, otherwise you might configure one more here, DRS tag. Who will identify whether this tag is valid or not? This DTD or schema. Yeah, go through XML, okay, concept. There you can see DTD and more in-depth XSD differences. In DTD, we don't have validation support, okay, strict length support or validation support, data validations we can't do with the DTD. DTD is having limitation, whereas in XSD we can mention the data types also. XSD is powerful than DTD, but both are for your XML only. In XML file, right? In XML file, while writing XML file, what are all tags you can use, what are all attributes you can use, that will tell by your DTD or XSD. Okay. No, this DTD actually doesn't having that uh, MVC schema. Still see, I don't see it will work. Same schema I'm using, and everything is you know commented out. Okay, everything is commented out, and just I have annotation config, component scan, and here I have stereotype also configured a method here, and the request method type also we need to put here the method. request method, HTTP request get. The default get method we are using right in the path. So the method type also configured. Let's see. I'm not expecting this to run, but yeah, let's see. If it is working, that's fine. To complete mapping shifted to stereotypes. Same record. Let me insert. Save. Executing. Oh, done. With the stereotype also working fine. Yep. So we completely shifted this bean mapping also, controller mapping also towards controller. As this is stereotype, right? Let me explain you how during execution these objects will be created. As soon as I deploy this application, right? At the first instance, all your objects will be created as soon as I deploy or at the time first user request. Okay, consider during deployment time it is creating your objects. First, dispatcher servlet internally is having IOC. Your dispatcher servlet is starting your IOC container. Before until MVC, we started IOC container using application context equal to new application context. But the same logic they have under dispatcher servlet. So inside dispatcher servlet, web application context is starting. Web application context server IOC. New web application context. Your web application context container is starting. This is your IOC container. Okay. So it is starting by loading your XML file. No, that is what I'm suspecting. Earlier I used to use MVC tag. I need to find out the reason. There are some more annotations. As soon as we put them, maybe it will stop working. We will see that. Okay. So as soon as you start your application, dispatcher servlet class will start your web application context by loading XML. Dispatcher servlet will load your XML file into application context. So as soon as your XML file loads, what we have in this XML file? One thing we have context colon annotation config to activate your annotations. This is fine. Now line number 6, we have context colon component scan and given base package name. The duty of component scan is what? The duty of component scan, create objects for controller classes, service classes, repository classes, component classes, configuration classes, comma component classes. If any class if any class if it find within this package, right? Within this package or its child packages with any stereotype, controller or service, repository, configuration or component. With any of this annotation, if it find a class, it will create that class object. This class's objects will be created automatically by scanning it. End of the day, they will be loaded into your IOC only. IOC will create controller, service, repository, configuration, component. But the most preference will given to configuration class because all configurations are happening here. So first configuration object will be created, then based on dependencies, right? It will create the next objects. But end of the day, all these objects will be created. All these objects will be created. One single object will be created for controller, service, repository, configuration, component. If you have five classes objects, it will create just by scanning that package. It will go to each package. Yeah, as I mentioned, configuration object is the first one. Configuration object it will create first. From here onwards, based on the dependency, generally without a dependency, if we have first configuration, next DAO class, then next service, then next controller. This is the order: config, DAO, service, controller, config, DAO, service, controller. That is the order, left to right. Component is having least priority, again depends on the place which you mentioned it. Depends on the place which you mentioned it. Let's say component you used for validation classes, that validations are required within controller class. So for controller class, the dependency is component. So before controller, component will be created based on the dependencies stages. Let's say child is having a parent dependency, parent will be created first before child, like that. Okay, correct. Back to front. Okay, right to left. Yeah. Hmm. 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 Okay. First thing, right? This is not related to your Spring. This XML attributes or XML schemas you have, right? These schemas will tell which tags are allowed to use inside here. Okay. So where we are loading this XML, XML is loading it into container. Which container? Web application context container. So from that XML, what it will extract, either your bean tags or some configurations, it will extract, right? So there are some fixed number of configurations or fixed number of tags we have in this XML, right? Like bean tags or property tags. So after loading, right? After loading this XML file, this IOC container will expect only the tags, bean tags or property tags or component or context. Only few tags are allowed in this XML file. Using that tags only, your IOC container will read the configuration. So this is pre-implementation, right? Already implemented. How they implemented? Internally, their code is something like get data which is configured in bean tag. Something they return. Instead of bean tag, if you have used some other tag, I don't want to use bean, I'll use pozo tag. Will it not allow? This is my wish, I want to put means no, because they don't know. Already they implemented with bean tag. At the rate, via bean tag only they are reading your configuration. So they need to restrict your configurations. They need to restrict your configurations to some particular tags only. How they do restrict? Via this schema. Under this schema, they have which all tags need to be utilized within your XML file. All that they mentioned within DTD or within schemas. Schema location, XML schema instance or XML schema reference, actually XML namespace. This is like your object reference. No, for that particular purpose, you don't have any dependency with these annotations. I need context to tag here. That's the reason I added it here. Why I need context to tag here? Just to activate my annotations and to mention component scan. So this DTD is required here. When you go to Spring Boot, you never use XML. All this context, everything, they returned with a programmatic approach. Okay, when they changed approach, they completely removed this XML dependencies. No XML you will see in boot. Okay, yeah. So just to read a little bit about DTD and XSD. So it's hardly half an hour or 1 hour. You go to DTD and XSD and do some examples on XML parsers, DOM parser, SAX parser. You will see parsers. Okay, just go to W3 schools or any tutorial point and see. You will understand about DTD and XSD. Okay, yeah, correct. Web application context container it is using. This is also your IOC, like application context. This is advanced context. There it is loading your XML. As soon as it loading, right, what it will do component scan and it will create all the objects. So connection, if you see, right, first to dispatcher servlet object creating in the deployment architecture, right, dispatcher servlet object creating. As soon as you deploy your application, this object will be created, dispatcher servlet, or at first time user request. This dispatcher servlet first request or on loading into your Tomcat. Anything should be fine. So as soon as this dispatcher servlet object created, as this is a servlet, there will be init method inside dispatcher servlet. There is a init method inside dispatcher servlet. Init method like your lifecycle methods init, and they will have service and a destroy method. Servlets are having lifecycle methods init, service, destroy. So your dispatcher servlet init method will called first during deployment only. I am talking about deployment only here. So init method will start first. As soon as your object created, init method will execute. Under this init method, web application context we have. Web application context. New web application. They returned. This is a already predefined class, right? They implemented in similar way. This web application context object created by loading your XML file. So under this XML file, what I have, all other my classes. For a front-end user, I created one controller class, service class, DAO class. For DAO required connection and all the templates I created under configuration class. So I mentioned stereotypes for my controller, which is executed for a user request, service, which is hit by your controller, repository, which will handle database operations, and I have at the rate configuration, which is having all the configurations. So here I am creating data source followed by session factory, then immediately Hibernate template. That Hibernate template auto void here. Using at the rate bean tags I created them. Same repository I auto void here. At the rate auto void your repository object. Same service I auto void here at the rate auto void. This is the order basically your objects will be created. Auto void service object. So as soon as this XML file loads, right? As soon as this XML file loads during your server startup, it will scan all your classes, configurations, services, controllers, repositories. That too, first it will create this configuration object. Your dispatchers are late. As soon as it started, your web application context, it will load XML and it will create objects for configurations first. Under this configurations, it will create all bean objects, dispatchers are late, session factory, Hibernate template, and this is the dependency dispatcher. Sorry, data source we pass it into session factory we pass it into Hibernate template. So this data source will be created, passed to session factory created, passed to Hibernate template, and this Hibernate template will be auto-wired to repository. Before Hibernate template auto-wiring here, repository object will be created. Repository objects created, then this Hibernate template injected. Same way, repository object we are auto-wiring here, repository object we are auto-wiring here. So before auto-wiring repository object, it will create service object, then it will auto-wire here. Then service object we need to auto-wire here. So before service object auto-wiring here, controller object will be created. So end of the day, all your objects are created and they are ready with the auto-wiring. Auto-wiring also happened. Auto-wiring of Hibernate template into repository, auto-wiring of repository into service, service into controller. Everything is interlinked. Every object is created and they linked and they are ready. When this has happened during init time only, during init method time only. Now actually the customers will start requesting. Once after deployment is done, we will get a request from views. We will get request from views. Front end. Front end can be your JSP page or Angular or mobile from wherever it is. We will be getting request via get, post, put. There are many HTTP methods. Delete, options, any method, any HTTP method can hit. All that request will come to service method. There is a service method, right? In Servlet, there is a service method. Service method is responsible for all HTTP methods, get, put, post, delete, options, whatever it is. So the request will come to service method. From here, it need to execute your controller methods. As part of controller, you will be implementing your methods. So during implementation of your controller methods, you can have all that methods here. In request mapping, you can put all your request with get to, put to, delete to, all mappings you can have here. Yes, service method will do that. For every request, right? It will identify them and it will handle it. Yes. So identifying it and mapping it will be done within service method only. Okay. So I got a request. I got a request from front end, which is registration.rbu and which is get method. So it will identify which controller is having this method. Or if I get .rbu post method, where I have this post method, put method, or options method, or delete method. So based on the request mapping method type from the front end, right, when you send get request, or when you send post request, or put request, on top of each method we will be having request mapping with your URL and method type. So as soon as the user, front end user request from get method, the request will go to dispatcher servlet service method. Dispatcher servlet service method will hit your method which is mapped with request mapping get. As soon as user calls post, dispatcher servlet service method will call post method. Same way all other methods. If user request for put method. If user request for get method, delete method. Based on user request, it will call the specific HTTP method, get, post, put, delete options. You can have any such methods here. So as soon as a request coming to your method need to call service. Already service is auto-wired. So from here, this method you may call your service methods. Service is already auto-wired with repo, so it will call repository methods. So repository end of the day it will do your CRUD operation. So this is how end-to-end application we need to design without missing any connection, so that when user request from front end, your request successfully will execute it. And as soon as you send response model and view as a model and view response here, then dispatcher select will check the configuration which you have already configured, right? View resolver also you configured. So it will already that view resolver object also it will have here. As soon as you load, right, XML view resolver also created. So it will check that view resolver for this model and view, which location I need to pick up for the output page. Your view resolver says go to so and so folder, give the so and so file. So that same file name it will suggest to your browser. There is a file from my location. I am giving a response. Just hit that file. You will be loading your output. So as soon as you give that output to browser will try to redirect that location. So as soon as it redirects, your page will be loaded and the response will be seen by front end. Yes. So as a response object, it will send. If it is a JSP, if you don't have JSP HTML pages, you can't return the data. If you have JSP, confidently you can send object. If not JSP, front end people is using Angular or different framework or mobile APIs, you can't send model and view object. Model and view object is not enough. Model and view is only for JSPs. No, no. Actually, no, no. Dispatcher servlet will send that model object as a this model object data. It will keep it into request scope. Request dot set attribute it will do and it will send that data. It will give you data. If you have JSP capability, then only you can read it. Or else, if you have a front end team, they are working separately without the JSP pages, Angular JS or something they are using. For them, this is not at all useful. In such scenarios, we need to send JSON response. Instead of sending data in the form of request object, you need to send in the form of JSON or XML. It's up to you which format you want to use to exchange the data. For pure web applications, this is okay. Model and view is okay for pure web applications because you are using request object here. JSP also is having inbuilt request object. JSP is having inbuilt request object. So they can use request object and read the data. You can perform Java code here inside JSP. Inside JSP, I can write Java code. It will not, restrict you to write Java code here. But if it is a pure HTML or a JavaScript framework page, you can't use request object. You can't write Java code. So in such scenario, this model and view object is not at all sufficient for you. You need to exchange data maybe in a different format. Instead of a request object, you may need to send directly JSON response or a XML response. A different set of responses you need to send. Mostly we use JSON, right? Yeah. No, no. Execute. No. Java code will not execute in your browser. It will be executed in your Tomcat. Tomcat is responsible for JSP compilation and execution. JSP. Yeah. Basically, yeah, that's a different concept. Service method only. Code will be executed in service method only. Whatever code you write, that is JSP service method. JSPs are like again servlets only. That's a lengthy concept. Okay, don't go into that confusion. But the compilation and execution happens in server only. Okay. Exactly. That's why people are not preferring. Correct. So mostly the preference is this layer. Hmm. But still, right? If you have a small application which is having 5 pages, I don't want front end, back end, blah blah blah. I want to keep everything together. In such scenarios, you can use tightly coupled architecture. Mhm. Mhm. Not yeah, not using it. This architecture is not at all using for enterprise, as I said, right? No JSPs, pure front end and pure backends we are using. So the information exchanging is happening via JSON only. They are also sending in the form of JSON. So the request also getting in the form of JSON, and that we are converting into object. Response also we are sending in the form of JSON, and that is iterating by front end. Okay, so tomorrow, right before going to start Spring Boot, one more MVC example I will give. Okay, by just adding one Ajax example with the JSON request and JSON response, and we can close that concepts. Okay, then we can go to Spring Boot. There we can see more in depth about MVC again. End of the boot discussion. Okay, I think still here. I hope you guys clear, right? From day one to now, why we discussed IOC concept, object creation, stereotypes, or auto wiring. We concluded them here, right? Yeah, yeah. This is the order. Okay. Let them create in any order. They will be connected. Okay. So all dependencies, let's say if you have A class needs a D dependency, definitely that D object also you should have furnished, you should have created. Otherwise, it can't able to auto-wire that here, right? I need a Hibernate template here, so first prepare it. During your coding, prepare Hibernate template. For Hibernate template, you need session factory. Let's create it first. For session factory, when you think data source is required, let's create it first. So like that in developer mind, right? You need to think I need Hibernate template. Then you need to imagine immediately, okay, I need to create Hibernate template object. So let's create it first. Before creating itself, you will get it out like without session factor, how I can create. Then immediately we'll create session factor, then this data source. So first to data source you will create, session factory create, Hibernate template create, then you will focus on your repository, save, update, delete, CRUD operations. Then you will shift your gate to service. Then you will shift your gate to controller. And with controller mappings and all. There you are done. You are done with your code. You can focus on your front end, or front end team may send your data if you are pure backend. So tomorrow we will see how we can exchange data in the form of JSON and XMLs. And if possible, I will show you the controller advisor also, how to handle exceptions. If I get an exception during runtime from repository, where do you handle it? Or from service or from controller? Do we have any exception handler layer here, or else directly will send exceptions to front end by saying null pointer exception or connection not available or service down? We should not show that exceptions to front end. Somehow we should block it. Yes, that one also. That both tomorrow we will see, and we will conclude it. No, that is again different, right? Web service means like you should accept the request coming from different servers. I'm talking about within the application itself. Of course, you can imagine in such a way also a kind of web service only. Hmm. No, who said we can send XML as a simple object in HTTP protocol itself. That's a protocol. SOAP is a protocol. It's a kind of protocol we follow. Protocol means a rule. A SOAP rule we follow, and we construct object with the SOAP rules and we send it. If you want to send a plain XML, you can send it. It need not to be a SOAP. No, no, no. WSDL file is to describe to the other teams. A description required, right? They may ask you how you implemented your method, get method, post method, put method, delete method, and you always need to explain. You need to show your code. This is my input, this is my output. Instead of you explaining it, that is a self description file. WSDL file is via WSDL file they can understand what are all your methods you have, what is input, what is output. It's like a documentation. Yes, SOAP is a protocol. It's a rule or a set of things that we follow while binding our data. Okay, we will see how we can exchange between Ajax call, right? Via Ajax call, JSON data or XML data, how we can post and get. At least JSON data we will see. Okay. Yeah, that's it. We'll close this session when we see tomorrow and we'll start boot. Okay. Today I will share the material. I'm keep on forgetting. Not forgetting. Actually, I'm thinking to add it in application itself. I'll do it for sure today. Okay.